So a couple of days ago in my Facebook community, which I will link in my bio, it's new and I hope you will join me there, I posted a post that gave 5 ways to simplify your homeschool. And one of those was to pick an anchor book for the week. This is really good if you're in like a childbirthing season, you have a newborn, if there's a sick season, moving season, all different kinds of seasons where maybe you need to pace back your homeschool for a little bit. I said to pick an anchor book and use that as your base for as many subjects as you can fit into it, and that will help simplify. And someone said, what do you mean? What do you mean? Can you elaborate? And so here I am, excited to elaborate about what I mean about an anchor book. And I'm going to give you an example for varying age ranges because this can work from preschool all the way up to high school. What do you mean if I say this is my anchor book for the week? This means that I'm going to use this and I'm going to pull as many things from it to help booster our learning, but also not having to pull a bunch of books on the shelf. So some examples for this, obviously it's about weather. So science is something I know that I can definitely pull from it. We can learn about different types of clouds. We can make a rain gauge. We can talk about the water cycle just from this one picture book. But what else can we do? We can do some art. We can try to paint our own rendition of what a gray day looks like. We can use only neutral colors and talk about warm tones and cool tones and then add a pop of color. You can bring in writing to this depending on the skill level of your child. You can have them trace over the names of colors that you see in this book. You can have them write on their own if they're independent. You can create copy work by getting a short line out of the book for them to copy. Or you could even have them write a gratitude list, which ties into the storyline of this book, or a short poem, which you can help them with. And then you have writing done. So we have science, art, and writing just from this one book. Okay, with this one, history and geography are super easy. You can talk about the time period. You can talk about prairie life and homesteading and just early 19th century America and where on the map she lived and where Western expansion occurred. History and geography. You can incorporate writing by having your children write journal entries and pretend that they were someone who lived on a prairie, or they could pretend to be our main character and write a journal entry from her point of view. If you want to tie in some art, you can grab some watercolors and try to paint your own prairie landscape or some of the animals or what her house looked like. You could even maybe dabble into paper silhouettes. And then finally, you can get science out of this by talking about the various prairie animals and the ecosystems and their survival techniques, all from this one little book. What about the middle grade? Let's dive into what you can do for them. I think that's one of the best ages that you can do this for because you can follow their interests and really keep them engaged. Okay, so this is one of my favorite, most recent middle grade books. In fact, the sequel just came out last month and I am in the middle of reading it aloud to my middle grade student, 12-year-old. And this is a book, it's got all the things, magic, mythical creatures, battles, all kinds of stuff. So what can you get from this? You can, first and foremost, talk about writing styles. How do you build a world? How do you imagine different magical abilities for characters to have? What processes do you think the author went through to develop those? What does the author have to do to make the world building believable for the reader? Can you compare a similar book and the writing styles and talk about first-person narrative? Can dive into history and culture. This book has a lot of African mythology ties into it, so that's a very long rabbit trail you can go into. The second book is about the Book of Anansi, and Anansi, you can find picture books about this folklore spider. You can find old myths. You can find all sorts of things that would tie you into the mythology of ancient Africa, even into today. Then you can talk about oral traditions. You can tie that into all sorts of cultures because that is one of the ways that most cultures passed things down before we had the written word. You can even create a timeline connecting the myths that you read about in here into modern fantasy stories. Now let's talk about something outside of that. You can bring in science or critical thinking into a book like this. What elements would be needed to have this? Electricity. How does electricity work? Magnetism. What are things that would draw you in and how those things work and how that can translate into what a human being who had that ability, how they would use it and what they could use it for. You can do art. I actually taught this in a book club and we did do this a little bit. I had them draw a comic of their favorite scenes through the book. You could also have them create their own book cover, like what would you do if you didn't make the choice that this author did for their book cover? What would you do? What do you think would be important to show? You could even create a map of Nick Blake's world inside of this, because she actually goes back and forth between a more modern world and the world of the Remarkables, which is another place entirely, so you can build some map making skills. Now let's talk about how you can do this at the high school level. Let's try Swindled, which is a really disturbing but interesting history of food, poison, all kinds of things. So, first, you can dive into some history with your high schoolers and talk about industrialization and how the way food has been changed, like how it's produced or sold throughout the years. You can research a specific scandal from the book, adulterated milk or fake coffee. You probably want to read this book too, trust me. Turn it into a mini case study. You can talk about how different laws, like the Pure Food and Drug Act, came into being and why. You can study chemical additives and preservatives and how they're used and why they're used and what you should avoid and what is safe for you to ingest. You can do a safe food experiment in your own kitchen. You can test the acidity in vinegar or learn how to read ingredient labels for hidden sugars, which is a really helpful life skill moving into adulthood. You can discuss the difference between natural and artificial flavorings. Now move into language arts and writing. What can you do with that, with this food book? You can teach them how to write a persuasive essay or an editorial about food regulation or consumer rights or even ethical marketing. Where is the line? You can have them create a public service announcement about a food recall. You can also compare the writing style of this author with investigative journalism of today. You can definitely loop in some economics in this because food is it's a consumer product. We can talk about the role of profit and consumer needs and consumer rights, how the whole industry overall has built its ethics or lack thereof. You can have your children research a modern food company and learn about its process from when it started up to now and try to investigate themselves if there are any practices they've had to change or should. And although this was a lengthy video for today, I hope it helps explain and encourage you to sometimes use anchor books to simplify your homeschool.